You're watching A News. I'm Leila Masimova. Here are the top stories for today. Trump reiterates hope to secure peace in Ukraine as he confirms his readiness to apply secondary tariffs on Russian oil. Tensions between China and Taiwan escalate, sparking concerns over security in Asia. Deaths toll in Myanmar earthquake exceeds 2,000 as a critical 72-hour time frame for rescue operation ends. U.S. President Donald Trump said he wants Russian President Vladimir Putin to make a deal to end the war in Ukraine. Speaking from the Oval Office, Trump expressed his desire to avoid imposing secondary tariffs on Russian oil buyers.
No, I want to see him make a deal so that we stop Russian soldiers and Ukrainian soldiers and other people from being killed. But mostly it's Russian and Ukrainian soldiers. They're losing at least 2,500 human beings, beautiful human beings, a week. And I wanted to stop. And some people would say, why do you worry about Russian soldiers or Ukrainian soldiers? I worry because it's like they're just like you people. They're like us. They're like all of us. And I seem to have an ability to do those things. And if I can do that, I think it's a very worthwhile thing to do. And I think we will. And no, I want to make sure that he follows through, and I think he will. I don't want to go secondary tariffs on his oil, but I think, it's something I would do if I thought he wasn't doing the job. What happens is we made a deal for rare earth. It was all done. And I heard through you, I haven't spoken to them yet, but through you I heard that they're now saying, well, I'll only do that deal if we get into NATO or something to that effect. Well, that was never, number one, discussed. Number two, I think it's going to be very long before Putin, they said you're not going into NATO. And it could be, that's probably the reason the war started, actually.
With global attention on the unfolding events in Russia, we're joined live from Moscow by John Kavalik, senior editor at Issue Insight. John, thanks for being here. Hello.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So there is a strong feeling amongst Ukraine's European allies that the Kremlin, despite President Donald Trump's efforts, is now delaying ceasefire negotiations. The obvious question that begs to be asked is very simple: what is now?
I apologize for little technical issues. Could you give me the question again, please?
Yeah, of course. So there is a strong feeling amongst Ukraine's European allies that the Kremlin, despite President Donald Trump's efforts, is now delaying ceasefire negotiations. The obvious question that begs to be asked is very simple: what is now?
Yeah, this is basically, if you want to use an optic, take two rubber bands and think of Donald Trump, President Trump, holding both rubber bands. President Zelensky is at one end, President Trump is at the other one. President Zelensky and President Trump are both pulling at those rubber bands. They're trying to see how much elasticity they have to get what they want from President Trump before the rubber band breaks. And that's basically where we are in terms of President Trump show frustration with President Putin, but at the same time he shows that frustration, he'll also say, well, I understand what he's doing. It's a negotiation tactic. I do the same thing. And then with President Zelensky, he seems to be moving closer to this mineral deal, this infrastructure deal. But the problem for President Zelensky is the text that is leaked on this agreement would basically allow the United States to control the future of Ukraine. It would interfere with Ukraine's obligations to the European Union, which wants it to become a member. So it's just a mess what we have going on. But having said that, there are three data points we're watching. April 20, when the Easters align between the two churches, May Day, which is Victory Day in Russia, and then June 18th, which is the SPIEF, the big international conference in Moscow. So I think we're going to see something happen on the ceasefire by one of those data points.
All right, and my second question would be, what do you make of the Russian proposal that the negotiations should be a drawn-out process?
And that's anything that's drawn out. You know, President Trump likes to draw things out, but he doesn't like it when people do it to him. So this is the challenge for President Putin. The negotiation tactic is absolutely stall, because keep trying to get more real estate while you're saying that you want a ceasefire, a clean ceasefire, Black Sea ceasefire, energy infrastructure ceasefire, but not actually signing a document and saying, okay, at this and this day, we're going to stop. And so President Trump is getting frustrated because what President Putin is risking, and again, this is part of that elasticity, President Putin has to be very careful because there's a tipping point with President Trump. If President Trump starts to feel that he's being used, that he's being taken advantage of, that people are laughing at him, that conservative media in the United States starts turning on him, that MAGA, Make America Great Again, constituencies start questioning his judgment, then you'll see him lash out. And that's where we see him mention secondary sanctions on Russian oil, like the U.S. has already done secondary sanctions on Venezuelan oil. So he will get angry, and then he could also turn that back pretty quickly. But for right now, you know, we're seeing a frustrated President Trump. President Putin has said, well, we're open to another phone call. The Russian government doesn't have a lot of time here before they lose President Trump. And President Trump will walk away, and he will turn and provide support to Ukraine.
Such an insightful answer. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
This was John Kavalik, senior editor at Issue Insight. U.S. President Donald Trump has said that his forthcoming tariff announcement is going to be the biggest one yet. The White House has said a major imbalance in trade with countries around the world will be addressed by a new round of tariffs on all goods produced outside of the United States. Obi Shambandar has more from Washington, D.C.
President Donald Trump has announced that he will officially unveil major new tariffs during a Rose Garden event at the White House on April 2nd. Calling it America's Liberation Day, White House officials said that any products made with foreign hands instead of Americans will face major tariffs designed to end what President Trump says are unfair trade practices. Trump had initially promised reciprocal tariffs on every nation that charges import tariffs on American goods. But recent statements by the president indicate that tariffs will be issued across the board on goods manufactured overseas. Those new tariffs, once they are rolled out later this week, will be issued on top of existing tariffs that penalize major American trading partners like Mexico, Canada, and China for not taking sufficient measures to curb the smuggling of deadly chemicals used to produce fentanyl in the United States. White House trade advisor Peter Navarro recently said that he believes that Trump's new tariffs could rake in $600 billion a year into the American Treasury. And President Trump's economic advisors believe that in the long term, costs incurred by the tariffs will be paid by businesses operating overseas and by countries that have a major trade imbalance with the United States. The White House also believes that tariffs will force many manufacturers to reshore their production line inside the United States, which would in turn translate to more jobs here at home. And that has been a major policy priority for the Trump administration. The upcoming tariffs are expected to be the most comprehensive and wide-reaching to be issued to date. During a press briefing on Monday, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt criticized the European Union, India, Japan, and Canada for placing tariffs on American products, including American dairy and agricultural goods. Leavitt described such foreign tariffs as, quote, disdain for the American worker. And she said that it's time for a president to take historic change to do what's right for the American people, and that's going to take place on Wednesday. Major new tariffs expected later this week by the Trump White House, and that is expected to have a major impact on global markets. Ube Shabander, Washington, D.C., A News.
A shift is underway in global markets as Asian equities rally and gold hits a record high. All eyes turn to Washington, where President Trump is set to unveil a major tariff plan that could redefine international trade and deepen global economic uncertainty.
Asian markets bounced back following a rally on Wall Street, but investors are staying cautious with fresh uncertainty looming over President Donald Trump's upcoming tariff announcement. Japan's Nikkei rose by 0.7%, South Korea's Kospi jumped 1.4%, and Taiwan's stock benchmark climbed nearly 1.7% as markets tried to recover from a volatile March. Hong Kong's Hang Seng also gained 1%, while mainland China's blue chip index posted smaller gains up just 0.1%. Much of the focus is on April 2nd, a day Trump has named Liberation Day, when he's expected to reveal a large-scale reciprocal tariff plan. The move could reshape US trade policy and spark ripple effects around the world. In times of uncertainty, investors often turn to gold, and on Tuesday, the precious metal hit an all-time high, reaching over $3,139 an ounce for a fourth straight session. The dollar weakened against the Japanese yen as investors sought safety, but it gained slightly against currencies like the Canadian dollar and the Mexican peso. The Australian dollar slipped after disappointing retail sales data. Traders are now watching the Reserve Bank of Australia for any hints of a possible interest rate cut in the months ahead. Meanwhile, US Treasury yields declined as demand for safer assets increased, a sign that investors remain nervous about the global economic outlook. Oil prices also edged lower after a strong start. Brent crude fell to just under $74.70 a barrel, while US crude slipped to $71.37. The earlier jump in oil came after Trump threatened secondary tariffs on Russian and Iranian crude and warned Tehran of possible military action if it refuses a new nuclear deal. As markets await further details from Washington, the mood is cautious. Trump's Liberation Day announcement may signal a shift in global trade, with consequences still unclear for investors, economies, and consumers around the world.
Tensions are escalating in the Taiwan Strait as China launches large-scale military drills surrounding Taiwan. Beijing frames the exercises as a stern warning to separatist forces, while Taiwan strongly condemns what it perceives as a destabilizing move that threatens regional security.
China announced that its army, navy, air, and rocket forces are conducting joint military exercises around Taiwan. These drills focus on blockading key areas, securing maritime superiority, and targeting ground positions. The goal is to practice joint operations and force projection across the Taiwan Strait. This military move follows the US pledging to counter Beijing's aggression in the region. Tensions have also risen after Taiwan's administration leader called Beijing a foreign hostile force and introduced measures to counter Chinese espionage. Taiwan officials confirmed that 19 Chinese naval vessels, including the aircraft carrier Shandong, were detected near the island within a 24-hour period. In response, Taiwan deployed warplanes, ships, and missile systems to monitor and counter China's military activities. The Taiwan administration condemned China's actions, calling them an attempt to escalate tensions and destabilize the region. Taiwanese defense officials have also suggested that China should focus on addressing its internal issues rather than provoking military confrontations abroad. The situation in the Taiwan Strait has become a significant flashpoint in global geopolitics. Beijing calls these exercises a legitimate action to protect its sovereignty and unity. It also labels them a punishment for Taiwan's leader, Lai Ching-te, accusing him of pushing for independence and increasing tensions.
A powerful earthquake that struck Myanmar and Thailand on Friday has led to 20 confirmed deaths across Thailand, with 13 of them from collapsed construction site as of 9 a.m. Rescue operations continue with efforts focusing on collapsed structures where survivors may still be trapped. Meanwhile, the death toll in Myanmar exceeded 2,000.
Situation remains tense in the aftermath of the 7.7 magnitude earthquake that struck Myanmar and Thailand. Aid groups arriving in the worst-hit areas of Myanmar said there was an urgent need for shelter, food and water after last week's devastating quake, while in Bangkok, rescuers pressed on searching for life under the rubble of a collapsed skyscraper. More than 2,000 people died in the quake, and as aid teams made into areas near the epicenter, it became clear to them that a massive humanitarian effort was required for those who survived. Chinese rescuers have been working around the clock at the site of a collapsed apartment block complex in Myanmar's quake-hit Mandalay, racing against time to rescue any remaining survivors.
The 72-hour golden period has passed, and the survival ability of the trapped people is getting weaker. In addition, the temperature is very high, making our rescue more and more difficult. In the face of this situation, we will not give up and will not abandon anyone.
Survivors are in urgent need of shelter, food, water and medical care. Many are sleeping outdoors due to fear of aftershocks, despite extreme conditions.
We have to stay strong. We can't afford to be weak because we have to wait for our child. We can't break down. We can't get sick.
The rescue teams are doing their best. I can see that. Just like what we've seen in the news. However it turns out, that's how it has to be. We just have to accept that things will be the way they are.
The ongoing civil conflict in Myanmar complicates relief efforts, with damaged infrastructure and communication lines further hindering the delivery of aid. Hospitals are treating patients outdoors due to structural damage and power outages. The full extent of the disaster remains unclear, especially in isolated areas that have yet to be reached. The international community continues to monitor the situation closely, with calls for unrestricted humanitarian access to ensure timely and effective assistance to all affected communities.
Iran has filed a complaint to the UN Security Council slamming US President Donald Trump's remarks as reckless and a clear violation of international law. This comes after Trump threatened to bomb Iran and impose secondary sanctions over its nuclear program. In a letter, Iran's UN ambassador warned Tehran will respond swiftly and decisively to any US or Israeli attack on its sovereignty or national interests. For more on topic, we go to Turash Ralilu, in Tehran-based analyst.
Iran's mission in the United Nations headquarters in New York has protested officially in a letter to UN Secretary General as well as UN Security Council Chairman regarding the recent threat by US President Donald Trump, in which he said that United States will heavily bombard Iran if Iran does not enter into negotiations over its nuclear program. And of course, Mr. Trump in his letter in early March has again threatened Iran and reportedly put a deadline of 2 months if Iran does not start negotiations, and otherwise it will use resort to military action. Iran responded to Mr. Trump's letter a few days ago and said that it will only agree with indirect negotiations with the United States as long as United States uses the language of force and intimidation or bullying. Of course, this policy by the United States is called maximum pressure campaign. So, and also yesterday, Iranian leader said that Iran will act strongly and decisively to any military adventurism if it is attacked or if it comes under any military invasion, which of course Iranian leader Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei said that he doesn't see prospects of war very close or approaching, but at any rate, Iran is ready to retaliate any such measures.
President Ilham Aliyev met with Mehdi Sanai, a political advisor to Iran's president, in Baku on April 1st. Sanai conveyed President Masoud Pezeshkian's greetings and praised Azerbaijan's development and growing bilateral ties. Talks focused on strengthening cooperation in transport, trade and energy, especially the North-South corridor. The sides also discussed progress on the Akband Bridge over the Aras River. President Aliyev welcomed deeper ties, noting shared values and the positive dynamic in recent bilateral visits. In our previous context, we discussed the complexity of regional development and the roles Turkey and Iran in the South Caucasus with Faris Ismailzadeh, a member of Azerbaijani parliament, and Rajib Soylu, bureau chief at the Middle East Eye.
I would say that Iranian-Armenian relationships have also developed a lot. So that has been a cause of tensions with official Baku. And there are moments when Azerbaijan is looking at Iran and Turkey as inclusive partnership, inviting both of them. For example, the format of 3+3, where Azerbaijan has proposed both Turkey and Iran and Russia to be actively involved with regional security, regional cooperation, inclusive format of cooperation. Also, Azerbaijan has focused a lot on bilateral relationship with Iran, transportation networks, linkages across the border. But overall, I would say that if we look at the last 10 years, I would say that Turkey's role has grown a lot. Turkey has become extremely powerful, let's say, player in South Caucasus as well as in Central Asia. And that has at times been at the cost of Iranian influence in the region.
I think Azerbaijan can play an important role. I think it already played a few years ago when Turkey has been trying to patch up things with Israel. I remember President Aliyev basically, publicly saying, even actually after a question that I asked by myself years ago, that, he wanted to see his both friends to come together, because that's what Turks do, right? I mean, they bring their friends together and basically they pitch their issues. But the problem is with the current Israeli administration is not Israel itself as a state, but more of the Benjamin Netanyahu's government. And I think Turkey has been making very clear in recent months that, especially as you can see it in the Turkish Foreign Minister's statement just 2 days ago, specifically highlighting that, this issue about Benjamin Netanyahu and his government rather than the state of Israel. And once there is a change within the Netanyahu government, and there will be a new government in place, I'm very sure Azerbaijan can play a very constructive role to bring both sides together and basically create this modus vivendi.
Right after the bulletin, we shall discuss relationship between the Central Asian nations and EU. Germany issued an apology to Azerbaijan for a social post depicting the flag of the former separatist regime, published on the German President Frank-Walter Steinmann's social media account, which has caused serious discontent in Azerbaijan. The head of the German president's office reaffirmed support for Azerbaijan's territorial integrity, apologized for incident caused by what was described as, quote, technical mistake, and approved the public release of the apology letter. Azerbaijan Defense Ministry stated that units of the Armenian armed forces periodically opened fire using small arms on Azerbaijan army positions. There has been no official response from Yerevan. The incidents come amid ongoing peace negotiations between the two countries. While talks have shown cautious progress, Baku continues to call for full respect of its territorial integrity and steps toward previous agreements. And joining us now live for discuss the latest border incidents between Azerbaijan and Armenia is Vasif Husseinov, head of the department at the Center for Analysis of International Relations, otherwise known as AIR Center. Welcome, Mr. Husseinov.
Thank you for having me.
Azerbaijan has again accused Armenia of opening fire across the border. Yerevan has denied this accusation. What is your reading of the situation?
The recent escalations, border clashes between Armenia and Azerbaijan have raised a lot of questions in Baku, as well as amongst the experts following the region abroad. The main question is, it happens immediately after sides agreed on the terms of peace treaty. And it looks like there are forces in Armenia who are happy with the recent progress in the peace treaty process. And these forces are trying to provoke and undermine the progress we have achieved over the past several months. And it also comes up with the extreme inconsistency with the policies of Prime Minister Pashinyan, Armenian leadership. On the one hand, very positive messages from the Armenian government that they are ready to sign a peace treaty as soon as possible. They are ready to establish peace and reconciliation between Armenia and Azerbaijan after around 3 decades of conflict. But at the same time, we see the consistent provocations at the border. And this, of course, raised a lot of concerns in Azerbaijan that Armenian government is in fact getting prepared for a military clash, or as some opposition figures in Armenia openly call for a revanchist war, for retaking what they call lost territories. Under these circumstances, we are calling both the Armenian side and also the international community to make sure that the Armenian government is abiding by the peace treaty proposals and avoid any military escalations at the border.
And how likely is this type of incidents could lead to bigger flare-ups?
You know, the reality is that the Armenian army has weakened a lot after the Second Karabakh War in 2020. Over the past 4 years, the fact is that Armenian government has been trying very consistently to rearm. And unfortunately, there are countries around the world, primarily France and India, which have been providing very diverse types of offensive weapons to Armenia. And apparently, these military supplies from abroad, as well as some statements from European countries, as well as India and others, have emboldened the Armenian government. And they think that they can delay the peace treaty process as long as they want, and on the other hand, getting prepared for a potential war. Under these circumstances, the possibility of a real conflict or real war is getting higher and higher. It's a real threat that we face in the South Caucasus between Armenia and Azerbaijan at the moment. On the other hand, we see that the Armenian government is refusing or is reluctant to change their constitution and remove territorial claims against Azerbaijan. Unfortunately, there are these claims enshrined in the constitution of the Republic of Armenia, which directly call for unification of Karabakh region of Azerbaijan with Armenia. And some Armenian political groups, opposition members, as well as some policymakers directly say that any peace treaty with Azerbaijan under these circumstances would be contradictory to the constitution of Armenia. On the other hand, try to make sure that the Armenian government is not going to sign any peace treaty recognizing Azerbaijan's territorial integrity, and on the other hand, get prepared for a revanchist war. And unfortunately, the threat of such escalation is getting higher and higher. And on the other hand, it is very disappointing that we don't see the international community, primarily the United States, pressuring Armenia to refrain from such confrontational stance and changing their constitution, recognizing Azerbaijan's territorial integrity, and paving the way for tangible peace, genuine peace on the ground.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Husseinov, for sharing your thoughts with us. This was Vasif Husseinov, head of the department at the Center for Analysis of International Relations. Armenia has taken another step in distancing itself from the Collective Security Treaty Organization. Yerevan confirms that it will sign off on the organization's 2024 budget, effectively withdrawing its financial support of the military alliance.
Armenia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs announced that it will not sign the CSTO's 2024 budget approval document. The country has informed the CSTO Secretariat of its decision to halt funding for the organization's operations. This move follows recent remarks by Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Pankin. He warned that if Armenia fails to meet its financial obligations by the end of 2025, CSTO member states may reconsider its role in the alliance. In early 2024, Armenia officially suspended its participation in the organization. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has repeatedly addressed Armenia's shifting stance. He stated that while the country has effectively withdrawn from CSTO operations, it still maintains a technical presence by not vetoing documents. In September, Prime Minister described the CSTO as a security threat to Armenia and declared that the point of no return in relations had already been passed. The Kremlin dismissed Pashinyan's claim, with spokesperson Dmitry Peskov insisting that the CSTO protects member states' sovereignty and poses no threat. Armenia's growing estrangement from Russia is also evident in its decision to freeze participation in CSTO military drills and reject invitations to summits. The rift between Armenia and Russia has deepened in recent months, particularly after the restoration of territorial integrity of Azerbaijan in September 2023.
Tajikistan, Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan have signed a historic agreement marking the junction point of their shared borders during a summit in Khujand. Our Fariza Kalimurzain has more.
A historic summit took place today in Khujand, where the leaders of Uzbekistan, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan signed a groundbreaking agreement on their shared border junction. Along with this, they adopted a joint declaration committing to transform their borders into a zone of peace, stability and development. This deal follows 23 years of negotiations resolving long-standing disputes in the Fergana Valley. For Kyrgyzstan's President Japarov, this marks his first visit to Tajikistan since their border reopened in the middle of March. He and Tajik President Emomali Rahmon also signed agreements on water resources and infrastructure projects. In a significant move, the two presidents launched the Sogdatka power transmission line, which connects the energy grids. This $1.2 billion project, part of a broader effort to export electricity to Afghanistan and Pakistan, marks a major step in regional cooperation. Mirziyoyev's participation in the trilateral summit provided additional regional momentum for discussions on economic cooperation and the strengthening of good neighborly relations in Central Asia. Border tensions between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, which date back to the Soviet era, have led to over 230 incidents, with the most intense fighting occurring between 2019 and 2020, resulting in heavy losses of both sides. A root cause of these conflicts has been the unclear status of 70 sections along the 984-kilometer border. However, since 2022, both sides have been working to resolve the issue. Today's agreement marks the final step in putting an end to these disputes. The media has described this agreement as a triumph of diplomacy. It includes the exchange of territories and the reopening of several land checkpoints along the border, which had been closed. Experts see this agreement as a shift of conflict to cooperation, enhancing regional security and holding broader significance for Central Asia and the global community. Fariza Kalimurzana, A News, in Almaty, Kazakhstan.
Thanks for joining us. Keep watching A News for the latest, and we'll be back before you know it.